the biggest mystery is how an aeroplane that has departed Kuala Lumpur in full, perfect operational status can make some deviant turns and disappear.
Look, the biggest mystery is where's the aircraft and what happened to it and why did it get there?
The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 has confounded experts and left relatives of the missing in despair.
I don't believe that they are already dead. I think that there are all kinds of possibilities.
Somebody is covering something up, and we're allowing it to happen.
4 months on, the pilot, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, remains a suspect. His sister finally breaks her silence in her first media interview.
I just don't see any logic. I don't see any reason why he would want to be a rogue pilot. Whatever happened, happened. He happened to be at the wrong place and the wrong time.
We examine what is known about the last hours of the flight and attempt to make sense of the mystery of MH370.
Delivery Malaysia 370, good morning.
Malaysia 370 is cleared to Beijing via Bibos Alpha departure, 6,000 feet, squawk 2157.
March 8, 2014. There were 239 people on board MH370 that night, 12 crew members, 227 passengers. They included Kathy and Robert Lawton, globetrotting grandparents from Australia, Chandrika Sharma, an aid worker on her way to Mongolia for a conference, and Malaysian Tony Tan, headed to Beijing for holiday. US citizen Philip Wood was going home to Beijing, where he had been living for several years. He had recently found work in Kuala Lumpur and was preparing for the move to the Malaysian capital.
Philip was on MH370 on the morning of March 8th because he was returning to Beijing to help me pack up our apartment to move to KL. The moving company was planning on showing up at 10 o'clock in the morning on March 8th in order to pick up the shipment. So Philip had to schedule to be on that red-eye flight in order to be there in time.
Mission 370, taxi to Oripan Alpha 11, runway 3 to right via standard route, Hotel Bravo.
Inside the cockpit, the pilots were making the final checks. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a 30-year veteran at Malaysia Airlines with 18,000 flying hours under his belt. Retired pilot Nick Huslan knew Zahari when they were trainees in the Philippines. As former chief pilot of Malaysia Airlines, he was also Zahari's boss.
My recollection of Captain Zahari in my tenure as a chief pilot is that he's a trouble-free pilot. Unless you have a problem, you will not be coming to office. So there could be occasions when I don't even see pilots for 2 to 3 years because they do not have any problems. Captain Zahari was one of those. He never had any problems.
That night, Captain Zahari was assisted by First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid. The co-pilot joined Malaysia Airlines in 2007, and this was his first time flying as a fully approved Boeing 777 pilot. The Boeing 777 is widely considered one of the safest commercial planes ever built. This particular jetliner had been in service for 12 years. A little old perhaps, but it had just passed maintenance checks 10 days earlier. There was nothing to suggest that this flight would be anything but routine.
Yeah, it was in the late afternoon of March 7th. So he was packing just a small bag to bring with him, and he couldn't remember what clothes he had in his closet in Beijing versus here, and what the weather was going to be like. So he'd called me and said, "Would you look in my closet and see what I have," so that he knew what to bring with him to travel as light as possible. And that was the last time we talked live. It was just by phone.
Right of takeoff. Nice. Alright, Destination Malaysia 37,
Malaysian 370, selamat pagi. Identify climb flight level 180, cancel the side interact direct to Ikari.
Early on the morning of March 8th, MH370 was flying on a route that took the plane past a waypoint called Igari. Waypoints are coordinates on the map that pilots in air traffic control use for navigation.
One of the key elements, for an airline commercial flight is that flight, whatever the pilot does, he needs to seek permission. He wants to turn left, he wants to turn right, he wants to gain altitude, lose altitude. It all must be done with ATC's blessing, or what we say in the industry, God's permission. The pilot cannot do anything to the aircraft without that permission.
Records from that fateful night showed that for the first hour of the flight, MH370 was flying exactly to plan. Audio recordings revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Neither did the plane's ACARS system, which sends regular reports on the plane's health back to the airline, indicate anything amiss. The plane climbs to 35,000 feet, cruising altitude. The plane now goes into autopilot.
The airspace that around the world is broken out into little blocks, and these blocks are called Flight Information Region, or FIR for short. When we talk about handover, we are actually talking about an aircraft that is leaving one flight information region and then entering into another flight information region. That means, in other words, the controller from one region is handing the responsibility of the aircraft to another controller that's working for another flight information region.
At 1:19 a.m., as the Boeing 777 approached Igari, Kuala Lumpur Radar Control instructed the pilots to contact Vietnamese air controllers on a new radio frequency.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9, good night.
5 seconds later, the acknowledgement came from the cockpit.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
But the plane never checks in with Ho Chi Minh Air Traffic Control. And that final message, "Good night, Malaysian 370, was the last time anyone heard from the aircraft.
Well, it was a little odd that I hadn't heard from him at the landing time. So the flight was set to land at 6:30, and usually he would ping me immediately upon landing. The driver was there waiting for him, and he didn't come, and that was so unusual, and the board just kept showing delayed.
Alone at home and desperate for information, Sarah Bajak went online in search of news.
By a little after 10, it was pretty obvious that something was seriously wrong, and I called Philip's parents first. That would have been That would have been a little after 10. And of course they were shocked, and we talked a little bit about what to do. And I gave them the number to Malaysian Airlines and asked them to continue, to try to call, and that I would keep calling. I think it was about 2:30 or 3:30. It was sometime in the afternoon. I wrote it all down, but I don't remember now. I did get a call from Malaysian Airlines. I was listed as next of kin on his booking ticket. And they said that the flight was missing, and they had no other information. There had been, they at that point in time said, we have no idea where it is. It's just missing.
March 8, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 has gone missing en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. At 1:19 a.m., the pilots were instructed to contact Ho Chi Minh Air Traffic Control, but the call was never made. Less than 2 minutes later, the plane's electronic signature disappeared from radar screens. It seemed as if the transponder had been switched off.
The transponder is a device and component installed in the aircraft navigation and transmission system. Its intention is to transmit the location, height, altitude, airspeed indication, direction to air traffic control. The pilots can turn off the transponder within the aircraft. It's easy as just turning a switch on a dial on the unit, on a transponder.
When you actually switch a transponder off, all that the air traffic controller would then now see is just the blip. It no longer knows who this blip is. It no longer has accurate information about what the blip is doing.
It appeared as if the plane had simply vanished. Records from the early hours of that morning reveal a scramble to locate the Boeing 777.
When you actually declare an aircraft lost, it's a big thing. You don't want to unnecessarily alarm states or alarm the next of kin if you're not absolutely sure. Because there's no going back once you've declared an aircraft is lost.
According to records, at 6:14 a.m., around the time the plane was due in Beijing, a decision was made. It had been 5 hours since MH370 made its last radio contact. Authorities decided to activate search and rescue.
We have activated the military, our Air Force and our Navy. Our National Security Council with our Coast Guard is also on it. And thirdly, we're working very closely with our neighbors.
In the days that followed, Malaysian authorities struggled to explain the situation to a public desperate for information. With no debris found, authorities could not confirm if the plane had crashed. Neither could they say where the plane had actually gone. Answers only led to more questions. Out of the 239 people on board, about 2/3 were Chinese nationals. Many were vocal in their frustration at the long, uncertain wait. And Steve Wong was one of them.
It is just a disaster and everything is in chaos. I want to know what exactly happens to our loved ones, to the plane.
That first week was really agonizing. From an intellectual perspective, I had already reasoned through, based on a lot of research, had already said, it doesn't make any sense that this is a crash. I'm quite sure it's an abduction. But everybody seemed to be looking at a crash, and they kept coming up with these reports of debris sightings. And so every time you get one, your heart crashes into your stomach because it's like, oh, it is a crash. And then it wouldn't be confirmed. No, it wasn't part of the plane. And then you'd be hopeful again. And then there would be another crash, an emotional crash. And so it was this conflict between my head telling me that what they were doing wasn't making any sense, and my heart still listening to all the news, going up and down, and being afraid that they would find it was an explosion or a crash of some sort, but yet hoping it wasn't, because I would far rather have him being held hostage someplace, meaning there's a chance that he could still be alive, than the fact that the plane's under the water, right?
MH370 lost contact with air traffic control over the South China Sea, and that was where the search teams from over 10 countries focused their efforts in that first week. But on the 6th day, without any explanation, authorities widened their search to the Andaman Sea off the coast of Penang. It was hundreds of miles away from where the public was told the plane had disappeared. Soon, the operation in the South China Sea was called off entirely, and the search focused on the Andaman Sea. It was later revealed that primary radar at 2 Malaysian military bases had tracked an unidentified blip as it flew across the peninsula towards the Andaman Sea.
The Royal Malaysian Air Force primary radar data showed that an aircraft which was believed but not confirmed to be MH370 did indeed turn back. It then flew in a westerly direction back over Peninsular Malaysia before turning northwest. Up until the point at which it left military primary radar coverage, these movements are consistent with deliberate action by someone on the plane.
MH370 was traveling in the complete opposite direction of where it was meant to go. It had made a U-turn back towards Malaysia instead of flying to Beijing. This was a shocking revelation, implying that the disappearance of MH370 was no accident, but a planned operation.
The first time I think is totally impossible, because I don't believe that a flight could, just turn around and fly to their snowfield, and for no reason.
The mystery deepened with the release of satellite data by British company Inmarsat. Data received from the plane showed that after flying in the opposite direction across the Malaysian peninsula, the jetliner then made another left turn and continued for hours towards the southern Indian Ocean.
According to this new data, flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
The southern Indian Ocean. This was a part of the world that had few inhabitants and saw little ocean or air traffic. Why would the plane be there?
It looks like definitely an unlawful, deliberate act to park the aeroplane in where it is alleged to be, the loneliest place on earth.
Investigators quickly zoomed in on the people on board, focusing on those with a technical knowledge of planes. Eventually, all 227 passengers were cleared. But the 12 crew remained officially under suspicion, especially the pilot, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah.
I just don't see any logic. I don't see any reason why he would want to be a rogue pilot.
Four months after the plane's disappearance, the sister of Captain Zahari finally breaks her silence to defend her brother's name.
It hurts. It hurts when people start accusing him without evidence, you know, because we know he did not have that kind of makeup.
But to others, Zahari had the opportunity and the capability.
Why greatest opportunity? He is already sitting in the cockpit. Why the greatest capability? Because he is trained to do whatever he can with the aircraft. But emotionally, I say no way that can happen. Emotionally. Emotions are generally not driven by logic. Logic is looking at the three things. Again, capability, opportunity, and motive. It seems to point at that direction.
Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 has gone missing. Available evidence points to deliberate human action. The transponder had been turned off. There was no distress signal from the cockpit. And the Boeing 777 had made a series of perplexing turns after deviating from its original flight path. One early theory is that the plane was hijacked. The former Malaysia chief pilot says this is unlikely.
After 9/11, procedures were tightened up as far as cockpit access are concerned. And I think Malaysia Airlines subscribes to it very religiously.
Even crew members seeking to enter the cockpit have to get permission from the pilots. The area outside the cockpit is also guarded by CCTV.
Pilots are trained very quickly, instinctively, to communicate and tell the ground cockpit intrusion potential. And that's all they need to say.
But no hijack alert was raised. For veteran accident investigator Michael Daniel, the point at which the transponder went silent offers another critical clue. The transponder identifies the plane to air traffic control radar. And it was switched off just as the plane was moving out of Malaysian airspace and into Vietnam airspace.
It tells me that if something was planned, it was planned very well at a point in time of this crucial handover.
This was the perfect time for a plane to disappear. The South China Sea is an area of busy air traffic. And if MH370 was late in checking in with the Vietnamese, air traffic controllers would not be alarmed just yet. Michael Daniel has a suspect in mind.
That requires somebody who's very knowledgeable, very experienced, knows the flight directions between, or the flight path between Malaysia and Vietnam, and that person would be the captain. The first officer in this case had less experience, less training, and perhaps less knowledge of the systems involved.
After vanishing from air traffic radar screens, the plane flew a path that, according to Michael Daniel, allowed it to avoid detection by both Malaysian and Indonesian radar.
Everything is pointing towards Captain Zahari circumstantially to play a big role in this.
Zahari Ahmad Shah may have had the capability and the opportunity more than anyone else on the plane. But every plan needs a motive. What was his?
He has health. He has wealth. Why would he want to be a rogue pilot?
Zahari Ahmad Shah is the 8th in a family of 9 siblings. And Sakinab is his eldest sister. Till today, she refuses to believe her brother could be responsible for the tragedy of MH370, or that he was a man intent on suicide.
We couldn't figure out why somebody who would want to commit suicide would prolong the agony of flying for 4, 5, 6 hours just to land down there. If it was done, if he was the one who planned it, he has to be some kind of Einstein, which he was not. He was just a man who took so much to aviation. He loved aviation. He spent a lot of his funds buying model aeroplanes. If he could, I think he would attach wings to himself and fly. That much he loved flying.
We have got nothing. We have got no black box. We've got nothing basically. Yeah, we have a missing plane. We have, and then we want to find out a reason for it, and we blame somebody for it. Somebody who cannot speak up for himself.
Captain and I used to come to this coffee shop a lot. We would come here whenever we are in town together, and Captain Zahari would always order a teh tarik.
Peter Chong has known Captain Zahari for 2 years, ever since the pilot started volunteering at community activities that Peter organized.
The Captain Zahari that I know is a caring and loving person. He would not hurt a fly. Therefore, I do not believe any of these speculations made against him. In fact, as a captain of a plane, if anything were to happen to it, he would make sure that his passenger and crew are taken care of before he even thinks about himself.
Attempts to tease out a motive for the pilot have so far led nowhere. Could the explanation lie somewhere else? What about electrical failure? It is a sudden, potentially catastrophic event that requires no motive. Aviation analyst and seasoned pilot Brian O'Dwyer thinks we might be looking at a pilot trying to save, not sabotage his plane. Electrical failure, he says, could explain why the transponder was mysteriously switched off.
Probably was not aware that there was a mechanical or electrical failure at the time of the sign-off. So in this case, an electrical failure could happen, or a fire or other incident, and that could cause a pilot to want to diagnose what's going on. Do I turn off this system? Is that the problem? Do I turn off all the systems, turn them on one by one to figure out where I have a problem?
Faced with an electrical problem, the first thing a pilot would do is turn back towards familiar airspace. For Brian O'Dwyer, this could explain the U-turn taken in the South China Sea.
Certainly those pilots knew airports, airspace in the Malaysian and KL area like the back of their hand. And so when you're dealing with a situation where you're worried about electrical, you're worried about this, worried about that, not having to worry about navigating because you know the territory really well is something that's really prudent.
But MH370 didn't land at the nearest airport. Instead, it continued flying across Malaysia and later south towards the Indian Ocean. According to O'Dwyer, these seemingly erratic turns could be a result of hypoxia. This was also the conclusion of a recent report by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. Hypoxia is a situation in which the body is starved of oxygen. If this happened to a pilot, he would not be able to navigate a plane properly. In fact, he would be flying as if he was drunk. Hypoxia in an aircraft is caused by a sudden loss of cabin pressure or an oxygen leak.
So what could cause an oxygen leak? There's a number of things that could cause it. It could be a structural crack or fatigue in the aircraft. There was a case in the US, there's a famous golfer, Payne Stewart, who died in a private airplane crash. And what happened is there was a slow oxygen leak. The people basically died of lack of oxygen, but the aircraft kept flying for 3 or 4 or 5 hours on its pre-programmed flight course.
But Nick Huslan says the route taken by the plane suggests not hypoxia, but a pilot in full control. Moreover, if he were able to execute a U-turn even under the influence of hypoxia, he'd have the frame of mind to radio for help. Nick Huslan also does not agree with the theory that MH370 had suffered an electrical failure.
If it's electrical, the autopilot cannot manipulate and fly the plane all the way to where it's supposed to be, because autopilot will be the first thing to go. Radios will be the last thing to go for communication.
Another mystery, the absence of a mayday call. This has been raised as evidence that the disappearance of MH370 was an act of sabotage.
If an aircraft in distress, one of the first things that a pilot would do after he's able to fly the aircraft, maintain some degree of control of the aircraft, is to communicate, to basically tell the world that I need help, something's wrong.
From my experience as a professional accident investigator, I can't recall any instance where there was not the ability of an aircraft being able to send a mayday signal or some type of distress signal.
And I think if you were dealing with an electrical fire situation like that, those things can spread very quickly in an aircraft. And you're not worried about calling air traffic control.
That's where the mystery is. We just don't know. We just don't know.
There are many theories surrounding the disappearance of MH370, none yet proven. Shedding light on what happened means finding the wreckage, especially the black box. The black box is located near the tail of the plane and contains the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. The cockpit voice recorder records only the last 2 hours of the flight. In most investigations, this would be crucial information. But in this case, the most critical part of MH370's flight was its first 2 hours. But with the cockpit voice recorder on a 2-hour loop, whatever was said in that first 2 hours would have been erased. Instead, investigators will have to rely on the flight data recorder for clues.
The flight data recorder records the flight characteristics of the aircraft and the flight path. Very important, very valuable information.
The flight data recorder can also reveal if there were problems with the engine or electrical systems, and also if the oxygen supply or cabin pressure were tampered with. It can even tell investigators whether the cockpit controls were manipulated by the captain or his first officer. Finding the black box is therefore crucial, and search teams have to hurry, because batteries last for only 30 days. But where do they begin? 40 minutes into the flight, MH370 vanished from air traffic control screens. An hour after that, it disappeared from the range of Malaysian military radar. Whether as a result of sabotage or a fault in the aircraft, it seemed as if MH370 had become invisible. But it was not invisible. Unknown to anyone at the time, the plane was quietly signaling its presence as it flew across the Indian Ocean. It was in fact talking to a satellite. Four months after Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 went missing, the search has yielded nothing. No debris, no bodies, no black box. In Kuala Lumpur, the absence of any concrete information has convinced Sarah Bejak that someone is hiding something.
There are far too many holes in this investigation for it to be trusted. Somebody is covering something up, and we're allowing it to happen.
Along with other affected families, Sarah has started a campaign to raise $5 million. The money will be spent on hiring a private investigator. It will also be used to reward whistleblowers.
Maybe they didn't know where to bring their information. Maybe they were afraid to bring it to the official investigation team because they believe that somehow they're complicit, or maybe they know that they're complicit, right? So they didn't have any place to go. Well, we're giving them a place to bring the lead now, confidentially, and we'll provide a reward for them so that if they need to disappear, they can.
Somebody must be in the know. It just cannot disappear. Huge thing like that.
But for months, as search teams combed the southern Indian Ocean with no results, it did seem as if they would never find the missing plane.
This is probably the most difficult search in human history.
This was a remote part of the world, known for its strong winds and deep, treacherous waters. What brought search teams here, thousands of miles away from the plane's last known position, was a series of communication signals transmitted to a satellite operated by British company Inmarsat. These are known as pings, and they showed that the plane continued flying for at least 6 hours after it vanished from radar screens.
If not for the ping, the last point of aircraft, we know positively where the aircraft will be, is just north of Sumatra at time 2:25 before it disappeared from radar.
Commercial aircraft like the Boeing 777 are fitted with a satellite data link. This allows the plane to digitally talk to air traffic controllers, to their airline operations centers, and to the engine manufacturer. In the case of MH370, it is believed that its satellite communication system was switched off early in the flight. But its powerful antenna remained operational and was sending pings automatically every hour.
The satellite is parked 36,000 kilometers away from Earth at the equator here. Okay. The transit time of the signal between the aircraft and the satellite is recorded in a satellite. Okay. And this piece of information allows engineers to know how far the aircraft is from the satellite.
With this information, engineers mapped a circle corresponding to the timing of each ping. 7 circles for the 7 pings received. The plane's last radar position was just off the western coast of Malaysia in the Andaman Sea. By estimating the plane's fuel levels at that point, engineers could calculate its maximum flying range. Combining this with the satellite tracks gave them 2 possible routes, one heading north, the other heading south. Further analysis convinced them that the Boeing 777 took the southern route, represented here by these red dots. Search teams had previously conducted aerial scans here. But before they could mount a thorough deep-sea search, there came news of a possible breakthrough. These signals were detected in April at 4 different locations. They were some distance away from the target search zone, but they were the best leads so far. Could they be from the black box of MH370? A robotic submarine was immediately deployed to search an area of about 850 square kilometers, slightly bigger than Singapore. But after 2 months, there was no sign of the black box or of any plane debris. This was a hammer blow for those anxiously waiting for news.
There was hope going, and you hope that they'll find it. And after all this while, and then they said, now the latest, perhaps we are looking at the wrong place. We are back to square one. We have not gone anywhere after 3 months.
For now, the search is on hold till August. When it resumes, the operation will move back to where the search teams had been working 2 months before. This time, experts have recalculated their data and think they've nailed the final resting place of MH370. This is an area of 60,000 square kilometers along the 7th arc, where the 7th and final satellite ping was transmitted from the aircraft. For experts, this last transmission provides crucial information about the fate of the plane. MH370 was programmed to send signals automatically every hour. These accounted for the first 6 pings received by the satellite. But the 7th ping was different. It was triggered by something unexpected happening to the plane's electrical systems.
It suggested that the system has been shut down at that point. It's not just a marker, you see. The previous ping were just markers, you know. But this was not a marker. It was actually a signal that the flight has ended.
The final ping was transmitted at 8:19 a.m. Experts believe that was the point at which MH370 ran out of fuel.
There is a possibility the aircraft flew no longer than 8:20 that morning.
Experts think the plane was flying on autopilot when it ran out of fuel over the Indian Ocean. If so, it is likely the plane went into a downward spiral before hitting the water.
I'm not convinced he's gone yet. Nobody has shown me any evidence. Nobody's found any debris from the plane. There's no confirmation that the flight is lost.
For the past month, Sarah Bejak has been leading a campaign to raise $5 million for informants. She's nowhere near her fundraising target, but she's not giving up.
I owe it to Philip to continue to look for him because he's got to be somewhere. And if that's alive, I want to get him out of his suffering as quickly as possible and get him home. And if he's dead, then I also still need to be able to bring him home so we can bury him properly. I mean, everybody needs closure on these things.
There is no closure in sight at all. Yeah. So every day you read of new speculations coming up, and so there is, you know, what I've told a friend. You know, you talk about closure. You cannot even find the door or the window to close it.
At home in Kuala Lumpur, Sakinab Ahmad Shah continues to struggle with the weight of suspicion on her brother, Captain Sahari Ahmad Shah.
We know he was not the cause of the loss of MH370. It was never planned by him. Whatever happened, happened. He happened to be at the wrong place and the wrong time.
Hijack, pilot sabotage, or a pilot out to save his plane from electrical failure. These are just a few of the many theories surrounding the events of March 8th. Finding answers means first finding the plane. Yet, after 4 months, the fate of MH370 and the 239 people on board remains a mystery.